All right. Are we ready to roll? I think
Ready as we're gonna be, right?
yes, I think we are. All right. Let's get things started. So, welcome everyone. Appreciate you joining us for today's webinar. We're going to be talking about the paper chase with smarter SDS management. I love that. We're going to be running a race today. So, burning off some of those calories during this lunch period. That sounds like fun.
I'm not running anywhere. I'm just gonna tell you that right now. Don't run.
But your hosts, myself and Cassie, will be here for 45 minutes to talk to you about this topic around SDS management. This is a conversational style webinar. So if you've been with us in the past, you'll be familiar with this style. If you're new to our program and our forum, welcome. Happy to have you. And this is you're going to kind of hear, Cassie and I just talking back and forth around SDS management and some specific topics. We'll end with a Q&A. So we'll run the conversation for about 45 minutes and then have Q&A at the end. You'll be able to submit questions in the chat box, and we'll follow up with those who may have to jump off if we take a little bit longer. So please note that we will stay on to answer all questions. And if we're running long on time, we understand you need to jump. Go right ahead. We'll follow up with you if you've had to jump with all of the remaining questions after the event. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to introduce you to our guest. So you're familiar with me, hopefully. I'm Wendy Schlett. I'm managing director here at Foresight. And we have, normally I say in the studio, but today we're on webinar actually. So on the screens, we have Cassie Lee. Cassie, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Cassie Lee. I'm a senior client advisor with the Cornerstone side of the Foresight Group. So I've been here 8 years, a little over 8 years now. And beginning of my career, I was in the field for environmental consulting, and my degree is in environmental management. Gosh, what else? I'm a boy mom. I have 3 dogs and a hairless cat. How about that? You
Awesome.
know,
I
feel free to
love
ask questions about that in the Q&A.
it. Yes, we'd love to hear more about that. I want to know what types of dogs, so we'll talk about that at the end. So,
Yeah,
I'd love to
okay.
have you with us, Cassie. Thanks for being part of the webinar. So I'm just going to give you a quick run through of who Foresight and, as Cassie mentioned, Cornerstone. So we've merged the organizations, Foresight and Cornerstone. We are one company, and as one company, we focus on sustainability, energy, and EHS. So that includes carbon utility optimization, energy engineering, and environmental health and safety, just to give you a sense of all the services that we can support. Some of our combined clients include those that you see on the screen. We have a focus, a pretty deep focus on mid-market manufacturing, but that's not to mean that we don't service others around that focus area. But our main support is for those manufacturers. All right, now it's time to dive into this program. So let's talk a little bit about SDSs. Cassie, can you tell us today, like, what is the beginning of SDS management? When did it originate, and how has it been handled historically?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you and I were talking about this webinar and getting it keyed up and kind of prepping for it, this is my jam. I grew up professionally and then grew up in environmental consulting. Professionally grew up um, learning the environmental history of properties. And so I was doing phase 1 site assessments. So when this came up and you're like, give us a history, I'm like, yes, I'm going to get to geek out on environmental history, right? But then as we were going through this, I learned even more from you. So I actually dug in a little bit from you, gave me a tidbit on a book you had read called The Radium Girls,
Oh,
and
yes.
it's actually a movie. So
Okay.
I didn't get to cram sesh last night on that, but I did look at it. It looks incredibly depressing and sad because the Radium Girls were a group of women who worked in a factories. The two that are big that are highlighted in the book that you recommended were in Illinois and in New Jersey, I believe.
Mm.
And it goes into the story of radium and being like the miracle element, right? And so I was kind of making it akin to what is apple cider vinegar today. And it was like, it's a cure-all for everything, but it was also used as an illumination element in the digital dials of clocks and watches and things like that in the 1910s and 1920s. And so in the factory, this group of women were taught to lick their paintbrush, much like we do our pens or, and then they write so out of habit. Well, unknowingly ingesting an amount of radioactive radium at the same time. Got very sick, led to a lot of different health problems, as you might imagine. But that opened up the concern or for employee welfare into industry, right? And so it started as early as the 1910s and 1940s. I'm sorry, the 1910s and 1920s. But it wasn't until the 1940s, which was like the precursor to what we now know as the Safety Data Sheet or SDS. They emerged as a chemical safety data sheet, and it was introduced by the Manufacturing Chemists Association to kind of standardize that hazard information as early as the 40s. And it wasn't until the 60s where we started seeing what we know as the previous iteration, which is the Material Safety Data Sheet or the MSDS, which appeared in industry. It wasn't until the 80s where OSHA got involved and mandated the use of MSDSs. So, it seems like it should have been happening long ago, but it wasn't until our lifetime that OSHA got involved and said, this has to happen, right? We have to have some kind of standardization to make hazard communication available to anyone using chemicals, right? So thank you to the women who stood up and said, something's wrong with this in the 1910s and 1920s to bring us to where we are today in more of a proactive fashion for SDSs and SDS management.
Okay. That's so
Yeah.
interesting. I just can't, when I mentioned that book yesterday, it didn't dawn on me the deep connection to the larger picture as well. So that's fantastic. I love that.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like the geek in me was like, oh my gosh, this is not only a part of my life and safety, but it's also just like so much a part of the U.S. history of manufacturing and industry, but also part of women's history too, which obviously is something dear to our hearts for reasons. So yeah, but then I watched the trailer for the movie and I'm like, I don't think I'm in the right frame of mind to watch this. It looks pretty depressing.
Oh my goodness. Yes, it is. I will say, because I read the book and it is a sad story. It has a strong ending and a one that has carried us through, but we digress, right? So
We
getting back
digress.
into this webinar, sounds like this information, is really meant to protect workers and communities. Starting with this Radium Girls, maybe we'll take this throughout the whole webinar series.
Right.
So how else is this data used? How do manufacturers use this data, the safety data sheets?
Yeah. So we kind of go into the the structure of the SDS. You're good. Yeah, go ahead, Carolyn. You're fine. Sorry, that's our trusty, our marketing friend in the background, flipping slides. So you're looking at the breakdown of what is now the current SDS and the requirements in the 16 sections of that SDS. So those 16 sections cover identification, obviously, of whatever chemical you're using, the hazards, composition, or think about that like when I talk to people about it as the recipe for whatever chemical you're looking at. The composition, the safe handling, the emergency measures, including, so in some of the sections, you're looking at product identifiers, again, hazard classifications, first aid and firefighting information, the physical and chemical properties and toxicological and ecological data. And then towards the end of that SDS, which when you look at an SDS, you're thinking safety data sheet, right? So you're like, is it one page? Is it a one pager? No, most of the time it's multiple pages because this is a ton of information, right? And so down towards the end of it, you could then get into the transport information and the regulatory information, and then any other key details that might be pertinent to that chemical. And I know, again, when you and I were talking about that, like some of that other section is where you live in.
It
on the
is.
sustainability side.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just looking at this, what's on our screen. And I know when we're on the sustainability side, looking at information for products, I know we're pulling from like section 2, that hazard identification, section 3, the composition information and those ingredients. So we want to know the ingredients in the materials. That's really helpful when it comes to different sustainability certifications that are related to the products. So we need to know that. We call it product chemistry. And then sometimes we get into that section 15, and the regulatory information. So this is a fantastic picture to be able to kind of highlight the consistencies so that across a number of different disciplines where we can pull it, pick out different information that we use to support different efforts. So, talk about a little bit about those efforts, and the types of reports that are generated. How do you use this data?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, rolling into this one too, early on in my career, when I was looking at SDS, right, I looked at it from it solely being a hazard communication tool. So for
Mhm.
me, it was an OSHA requirement for that role. We moved into the globally harmonized system, the GHS system, um, in that iteration as well. But it wasn't until I started with Cornerstone and realized on the compliance side of things how much information is in an SDS that we then use going forward for environmental reporting, such as you see on your screen here.
Mhm.
So the SDS providing that chemical composition and the quantities and the physical properties, such as the volatile organic compounds or the hazardous air pollutants, which you see here, and that content, it can be used and then disseminated down into some of the reports and requirements that people and facilities are using and required to file every year. So, prime example that we dive into yearly in March 1st, like most of you listening do also, is that tier 2, or that emergency response filing that you have to do every year on March 1st. And all that data can be found in tracking the chemicals in your inventory from the SDSs. And it's extrapolated then from that information. Same thing with 4MR. If you're looking at toxic release inventory information, dials it back into the SDS. Proposition 65, Prop 65 out in California. I know you see prop labeling on everything anymore because people are shipping. Same thing with Reach and Rojas, the European standards. All that can be dialed back into all the way back to an SDS sheet, right? And that information in the SDS sheet. Where it gets a little bit tricky and a little bit gray is when we're looking. I know the hot topic right now is PFAS, right? And the
Mhm.
information that is contained in the SDS, is that going to give us what we need for any kind of PFAS reporting? And the hard thing is you have, not only do you have safety data sheets, you have environmental data sheets, you have technical data sheets. And so a lot of that PFAS information is not necessarily in an SDS. It's in the environmental data sheet. So it's a different adjacent, probably a whole nother webinar topic, which I am not versed in enough to tell you about. But yeah, so there's a ton of different stuff you can pull from that. So inventory tracking. So the data in an SDS helps us track the chemicals that can be that are used and then released in the facility. Emissions tracking, you see the air record keeping and reporting. Obviously, that waste data can be dialed back into waste management in a facility as well. So there's so much information in SDS that we then pull out for these different compliance requirements that we see from our clients.
Oh my goodness, it makes me think about this being like a really key component of a chemical management system for a manufacturing site, like to be able to help set that whole program up. Like this feels like that instrumental document that can help companies try and navigate what are those hazards, how should we use and store and um, utilize as we process whatever chemical it is that happens to be in our facility. We, as
Yeah,
you mentioned, we use this in so many other places too, and some of those places are on the sustainability side. And when I think about like You're not only using it for a chemical management system, which I love because that's a little bit of my background is environmental management system. So I see that parallel and see, where some of that um, information overlap can be helpful to support, a management system. We also see it on the sustainability side. So when I mentioned earlier in that previous slide that there were different sections where we were pulling out very specific information from an SDS for products, we use that information to help us generate sustainability certifications. So some of those certifications are, very specific to product chemistry, one being a declare label or a health product declaration. So these are two different types of certifications where we directly need all product materials connected to a bill of materials and then be able to identify all of the ingredients within those materials down to a very low threshold. So for those of you who are familiar with threshold levels, this would be down to like somewhere between 1,000 parts per million and 100 parts per million. So think a very, very small quantity. And so being able to understand where to get all of that information, we typically begin with the safety data sheet. It'll get us pretty close. For HPDs, we'll be able to get all of the information we need off a safety data sheet. For declare, we'll have to go a little bit further, but it's definitely a great starting point for those certifications. And then, there's some other certifications listed here as well because safety data sheets are incremental. BIFMA level certification, that is one. It's a multi-attribute standard that also includes product chemistry. Same with cradle to cradle. So lots of different certifications on the sustainability side draw from the safety data sheet. So the more, from our perspective, the more that a company is aware of safety data sheets and how they can be used even beyond the traditional use for health and safety of their employees is beneficial to have those managed and organized and I guess you could call it controlled within the organization. So if we think about that, how are companies beginning to manage their SDSs?
Yeah, so I think, backing into that again, I think it's important as we're looking at this, especially, is the employer requirements that are built around hazardous communication and OSHA. You talked about that accessibility, but so employers are required that those SESs are readily accessible for all employees so that they are aware of the chemical hazards within their workplace, right? So as you're looking at the screen here, it's done in multiple ways. And I think when we were kind of running through this, I showed my age. And when I started in my career and was doing assessments, I would see the famous bright yellow binder, which you can still buy anywhere and everywhere and fill with paper. And you put it out. And there's a lot of facilities that do just fine with this if they don't have an unmanageable number, right? So they have a bright yellow binder with their SDSs in it in an accessible place for their employees to get to and then go rifle through when they have an emergency. No, that sounds terrible. It's still a very, effective way to meet that hazardous communication requirement. So it's still very prevalent in industry and manufacturing. We've seen the move, and I think I had a stopgap in here between. We've seen the move from paper binders into the digital world during even my career. I think I referenced that I'm an exennial and an elder millennial, if you will. I lean in more to the Gen X, I will say that, to the Gen X folks. But when I started my career and saw the binders, I then started seeing people and companies embrace electronic options for this. So, but at that time, it was like the Access software, which thank goodness went extinct somewhere along the line because it wasn't intuitive, it wasn't user friendly. And then now we have these, crazy advanced systems where you can get instant access, right? Mm-hmm. So the digital side of it is just above and beyond as far as being a user or someone that is in the plant, the digital system seems to be showing more prevalence in industry now.
Mhm.
Whether that is, someone still using an Excel or an intranet in their facility at computer stations for staff to use, or a cloud-based system where, you can access it from your phone or your mobile device or, an app. So, we've seen, and right now it's all across the board. I just love this like point in our history too, because everybody's using every system right now. I mean, accepting access because thankfully that's gone. Um, but yeah, so I've seen everything anymore when you go into a facility.
Oh, and I have to say too, I'm grateful that those systems are becoming more digital because, when we have to go back and try and sort through, some companies have hundreds, if not thousands, of SDSs that they're trying to manage. If we're trying to sort through to find, the materials that are product level SDSs, that can be a challenging exercise. So the more it's digitized, the easier it is for us to just download a report and connect that to the bill of material then. So we're seeing advances on that where because the data is so consistently organized and now being digitized, it can be utilized in so many different places. It's going to be so beneficial. And even just, some of the opportunities going forward with um, where and how the the information can be shared. But before we get to that, we
Yeah.
know that there's challenges in and around this. We've talked about just the consistency of the data, the collection of it. Like, can you share some more information around what types of hurdles companies are facing when it comes to
Um,
SDSs?
Absolutely, absolutely. So probably the biggest one is the time involved because it has this communication rule. It there's some limiting factors to it, right? So one of the requirements is that you have to have the most up to date SDS in your system for your employees to have. So whether it be in the binder or whether it be in your computer system, that has to be the most up to date iteration of an SDS or up to date version of an SDS. And as you can imagine, if you're managing 20, that's not a crazy time suck. But if you're managing 4,000, I have a client that has 4,000 plus 4,000, I think 3,900 is the last check. SDSs. I mean, that's more than a full-time job
Oh,
that
yeah.
you're keeping those up to date, right? Um, Another big one is there is a records retention rule around SDSs. SDSs. If you say it enough times, you screw it up. Um, so there's a records retention rule around it, and it's a 30-year records retention. So you have to have an archive of all of the versions of an SDS, and you're supposed to keep those in house, right, and available. So as you can think of what that looks like if you're chasing paper,
Yeah.
to coin a phrase, uh, well, not coin it to overuse that. You have a file cabinet full of all these versions of an SDS. If you use the same chemical and you're in industry for 20 plus years, you have a file cabinet or multiple file cabinets full of SDSs for 30 plus years. So it is a time intensive process.
Mm.
And then, and in most cases, you're just managing SDSs. You're not even using that information to its
Mm.
best and highest use either. You're just managing the paper. So it's time intensive, and a lot of folks try and do some combination of having the SDS binder and then having like an Excel sheet catalog. And now you're managing two different things and
Mm.
then trying to make sure you have the most up to date version. So it's very time intensive more than anything.
Well, I can't imagine keeping records for 30 years. I think about just my tax documents. I only have to keep those for seven, like 30 years. I mean, that's got, you're right. Like it's taking warehouses of rooms to keep that
Right?
much, paper documentation. Wow.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we talked about the paper side and the hurdles. Let's talk about the digital solution. Like,
let's
We've
make it
got to
better.
find good ways to manage this need.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the biggest benefit to a digital solution is that instant access, right? So you can quickly find crucial information, chemical handling information, and safety and first aid on an SDS in the digital sphere, right? That is if you're using something that's cataloging information. I should add that caveat because
Mm,
some folks use it as a library system. So you have an intranet. Let's not throw all digital solutions in the same bucket, because if you're using that file folder on your intranet of SDSs, right, and your person on the floor goes out to access that, you're still opening we'll call it a virtual paper file, because you're still
mm,
having PDFs of SDSs. So while it's searchable, a lot easier than a folder, right? But if you're in an emergency situation, it'd be a lot easier if you could just search the chemical you're using and pull up the SDS in live real time. Um,
yeah.
so instant access with the cloud-based systems, you have remote accessibility. So a lot of folks have the computer station sitting on their floor where their staff can go and access the SDS, but the cloud-based systems you can get on your iPad or you can get on your phone.
Mm,
So faster emergency response. Um, and then you have the flexibility that we've already talked about in being able to key in constituents um, and hazards and all the information on that SDS, making all that information that much more usable in a digital sphere. So being able to extrapolate that data into a usable format for reporting on the environmental side of things, or in your case, on the sustainability declare and BIFMA on automation of reports like that.
yeah.
Yeah, and then the reduced amount of errors. So you're kind of eliminating. I hate to say you're eliminating the human factor. But you're not entirely eliminating, because your system is only as good as the information in it, right? So if your system is outdated, if you don't have somebody in purchasing or somebody in facilities that's putting that new SDS in your digital system,
Mhm.
then it's not doing you any good anyway, right?
Yep.
So you still have that human element of it, but once it's in there, you have that information there, and you can automate a lot of the updates to that, or a lot of the information and the data that's being kept. And then from the sustainability side, if you're the digital solution, is the way you're going, you're eliminating waste. You're improving efficiencies. You're eliminating a physical storage of that archive. All those things play into that as well.
Like, I mean, I'm just thinking of all these benefits that you're saying. So, with not having a necessarily needing that person to, constantly be managing this file space, you can actually have them helping the employees on the floor or in the plant to be able to be safer employees long term. So it gives them more time, I guess you could say, back in their day to be able to focus on the humans that they're trying to help. And I also think just about the management side of things and reporting aspects that you mentioned early on. You mentioned that there's a whole bunch of reporting requirements. I can't imagine trying to pull this information out of a paper copy and have to then report on it to the different state agencies or federal agencies that need to be receiving this information. Like that seems like a huge undertaking in and of itself, that it seems like all of these digital solutions are just going to continually help advance and make more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on a really important piece of this too. The trend obviously is to do more with less, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that includes the people in the facility. So, there's a reason that everybody says EHS, and it's crammed into one non-word of an acronym, right? It's because you have your safety manager also doing your environmental consulting or your environmental reporting and all the environmental daily inspections and things that go along with that, but are also doing forklift training and onboarding new employees and all the things. So we're all wearing all these different hats. And so a lot of times the thing that gets lost in the shuffle is just this, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
tediousness of updating your SDSs and keeping that that library, if you will, in the shape it's supposed to be in to meet that OSHA regulation. So, it's not lost that this is a time game, right? And where do
Yeah.
you put the time, and where's the highest and best use of your time? So the digital move with this system has been incredible, especially for a lot of my clients
Well, and
who I've been working with.
I'd love to talk about this aspect. So this is our webinar, so we're going to do a little plug here. But one of the really interesting things that I found out about Cornerstone is they have a digital solution for SDS management. So, Cassie, you have something called Foundation SDS to help
Mhm.
support this. Can you share just a little bit about Foundation SDS? And
Yeah,
how it connects to this
absolutely.
whole effort that we've been talking
Absolutely.
about.
I mean, like you're right. It wouldn't behoove us to not talk about ourselves on a webinar. Um, but I think one of the things that I like to when I'm talking to my clients, and I know we have a case study here in a minute to talk through, but one of the things that I talk about when I talk about our SDS management and foundation system is that while it does meet your OSHA hazardous communication requirements, we built it as an environmental consultant. We built it as a tool to meet all the demand for data and to be able to make that data usable. And so when our developers and our IT team, who are the folks that develop it, are still here, because Cornerstone is going on 30. Should know that
Oh,
30-ish, 30,
30 years.
31,
You're as old as the
30-ish.
requirement to store the SDS. I love
Oh,
it. I
yeah. Look
love
at that. And I'm old enough to drink. And so yeah, but the the folks that design and develop that system are still here and are still very much involved with the day to day and how we build people's individual systems for them. Just like I said, all the digital solutions are different too. So one of the things that we have found through that collection of data is, you know, a lot of the digital solutions do completely lose the human element, whereas we found it that it's key to, especially our clients and interactions with our clients, but it's also key to the data and the reporting requirements that we assign a chemical manager internally to manage that data on behalf of the client so that there is tracking through all the iterations of the SDS, so that we're archiving stuff appropriately, so that somebody's monitoring that system. One of the benefits to our system is that we do the updates for the client. So we're meeting that update requirement on their behalf. It's not something they have to worry about after they engage with the Foundation SDS system. So there's no one going out there to obtain that from the manufacturer, unless the manufacturer won't release it to us for some confidentiality reason. But in most cases, that chemical manager goes out and obtains the most up-to-date SDS and then puts it into the system for you in your own library. And then that all that data is keyed in, cast numbers, that recipe is all keyed in so that we can use that data for our other reporting for air, for tier two, for TRI. So we're building the system as a tool with a purpose. And so that's one of the things that I always talk to clients about when I'm engaging that conversation. The other key is it is call it a contingency plan, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that we see a lot is there is turnover in a role, in all roles, especially right now, in all staffing, but with someone that's spending a lot of time in the tedium of tracking SDSs, there's a lot of turnover in that role. And so when that changes hands, it's been a really huge benefit to have it automated and
Mhm.
someone already doing that for you and plugged in, even down to the tier two reporting. I this wasn't the case study I shared, but I went into a client and it was a turnover situation where there was somebody new managing the system, and they were like, well, why do you do this for us? I'm like, well, if we hadn't, you guys have missed your tier two reports for the last 3 years because of the turnover in your facility. So we've been keeping you compliant through all the changes in your facility. So that's been a big piece of it too.
That's so helpful. So, you know, I want to really get into this case study because it sounds like it could really help companies begin to understand what are the opportunities for this system to be able to help in the process of managing SDSs through turnover or any other, reporting requirements that they may have.
Yeah. So this is a great one. This was pretty early in my time with Cornerstone. I'd say pretty early. When we do demos, they're live webinars, and I always have one of the big things here, and that I love about our merger with Foresight is that it's all about teamwork, right? So up until I walked into this site, because there was a change in the EHS manager, I've had always had one of our IT developers on a webinar with me and driving it and talking about all the features and benefits of the system. It was not the case in this one. So I'm really excited to you about this one. I'm really proud of this one because I went in to have a meeting with them about the services that we had been contracted to do. And most of it was the air and water and waste reporting, pretty standard environmental consulting stuff. And I asked them just during the course of conversation, how are you managing your SDSs? And because it flows into all the reporting that we're doing, and they brought up the system they were using, and it was one of our competitors, not going to lie, like one of our competitor systems, which is fine if you're only trying to meet that HAZCOM requirement for OSHA.
Mhm.
And they said, well, this is great. You're totally meeting that. Good job. I can't pull information from this system though, the way I can from ours. Plus, you're coming up on a tier 2 deadline.
Mm.
And so I busted out my laptop. I didn't even have my special touch screen then. I busted out my laptop and did a quick, like, down and dirty demo by myself, um, and showed them what our system was capable of. And then they followed up with, we don't have time to do a product quantity list and go through our chemical inventory and help build this. And so luckily, again, the IT team has built in a mobile tool for our staff to come on site, do a physical chemical inventory, and build your system so that it is far more, it's a far more compressed timeline to get your system up and running so that we can meet, like in this situation, it was meet the tier 2 deadline. And the big thing for them, again, was that they had, gosh, I don't think I'd been with them for 3 years, and this was their third EHS person.
Oh,
And so there was
wow.
a loss of information that was
Mhm.
happening with each turn of the guard. And so this helped them answer that and 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 fill that gap, and again be that contingency plan for when they had a staff change. So
Mm.
yeah, I'm real proud of this one, especially because it was pretty early with my time with Cornerstone. And
Well,
there's still a client, a very active client. It's a huge facility too. It's a campus facility. Um, so it was really important to them to have that digital solution and access for their they vacillate between 650 to 750 employees given the time of year. So the
wow.
kiosk situation or remote accessibility was extremely important for them.
Well, and it feels like if they're a campus situation and they have more than, two or three plants in that campus, it makes sense to find a way to keep it all consistent through that process. So I can, having those paper binders can be a challenge to keep up consistently. So having it all digital makes so much sense when you're going from plant to plant and you have multiple plants that you're trying to follow the exact same process and procedure. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the biggest benefits to, the SDS, the foundation SDS, is that it's customizable, which we don't see a lot in other systems that I look at. So in this
Mhm.
situation, multiple buildings, building numbers, storage locations for chemicals, all of that can also be categorized in your system, and it's fully searchable. So if you say, I need to go to I'm looking for inventory in chemical crib building 3, it can dial it down to that. So you can just pull up
Wow.
the location and find out the chemicals in there. In an emergency situation, you can imagine how important that is,
Mhm.
to be able to say, this is where I'm sitting right now. Um, what's in here with me, or, what SDSs do I need to be aware of? So
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I'm just thinking about that emergency situation. If I got something in my eyes, let's say, and now I needed to decide, do I need to go to that eye wash station or is that the wrong thing for
Yeah.
me to do? And so I need to connect with someone who can help me because it's already in my eyes. And then they're going to have maybe a little bit of a panic. And then they're going to be like, okay, now where's that paper binder? I need to go find that paper. And by the time
Right.
you're like going
I
through all
can't
the
see
papers,
anything.
yeah, your eyes are really, really challenged. So, having that instant digital access, man, I can just imagine how much it's saving personnel's health and well-being, even in that process. So, what a phenomenal thing. And, in connecting it to the sustainability side, like I love the fact that you're talking about how adaptable it is because that's where we're finding opportunities just because there is so much information on those safety data sheets that we can use in so many other places on the sustainability side and being able to pull those ingredients and being able to pull the quantities within those ingredients all the way down to cast numbers. Like that is so helpful for us when it comes to some of those different labels that I was talking about, HPDs, health product declarations, and declare labels, and things like that, where companies are starting to get that specific around their products and the materials that are in those products to make sure they're either meeting regulations around PFAS or meeting, a customer requirement that says we don't want any PVC in our product, as an
Yeah.
example. So, oh, such a great system, and what a good case study. That's so fantastic. Well, we're at the end of our time. And just want to let you know that we do have another webinar next month on TCFD reporting. We're going to have Danny McGee, who's here at Foresight, along with a guest, Dion Glasser, who's from the Uplift Agency, phenomenal resource on all things TCFD. So please join us if you are subject to California SB 261 and are looking at having to implement a report. This could be for you. So getting in now, we have time about a little bit more than 15 minutes. If there's any questions and answers, we would be happy to answer those for you now.
Quiet for today. We can talk more about my movie reviews. Just
Yeah, that
kidding.
Radon Girls. I'm so excited that you got into that. That was so good. The book, I did,
Yeah.
so I haven't seen the movie, but the book was it is a fantastic description of a very, very challenging and somewhat sad time in the United States, but it led to so many helpful things for employers.
Oh, Drake. How long okay, Drake asked, how long do you need to keep an SDS on a chemical if you no longer have it in your building? So that is the 30-year retention rule. And I think I'm pretty sure I'm going to see you next week, Drake, but I'm happy to share with you some direct literature from OSHA on that. But yeah, it's 30 years. It's painful, right? That's a painful time period.
Certainly is. I mean, I don't think the EPA even requires 30 years. I think most of those reports are like, or and permits are like 5. So 30 years, that's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, it is. So the funny thing is, not funny, but of course, when I learned about the retention rule, I'm like, that's asinine. Um, but I'm not going to argue OSHA, right? When is that ever going to come up? When is that ever going to come up? So the client that I mentioned that I had gone into that had the access system that they use, that one of their IT guys created their SDS system through this access. If you don't know what access is, you're welcome. Um, but so it
I'm
was
with
not
you,
very
Caroline.
searchable.
I'm sorry. I'm with you, Cassie. I
Yeah.
remember.
So they had access, and he thought like this is never going to come up. While the municipality had a I'm trying to combined sewer overflow like
Mhm.
situation where there was a contaminant
Mhm.
in the sewer, and they were trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. And they asked him for all the iterations of an SDS that he had historically for
Oh,
the chemical that contained the constituent they were trying to dial in on. I
wow.
was like, well, there goes that. It turns out that is a thing.
It is
So
important to have those.
if you ever think it won't apply, that's when they come and show up at your door once your SDSs.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's crazy.
So yeah,
So it is important, you know, it is important for all of us to keep our paperwork in one form or fashion. And hopefully going forward, it's more in digital form, which might make it easier for everyone.
easier and more eco-friendly. So,
So, Cassie, I have to say, because I'm hosting this, I'm not able to see if there's any more questions. So I appreciate you
oh,
checking in the
sorry.
chat.
Yeah, no, you're good. Um, I answered the one question we had gotten.
All right.
I would encourage people. I will, just since we have another minute, I will encourage people. The Radium Girls looks fascinating, the movie. I have also geeked out on, especially recently with all the PFAS in the news, I've
Mhm.
geeked out on the history of PFAS. So if you're interested in that, I know you're about to shoot up a slide with contact. I wrote a whole article, article being a blog about the history of PFAS at one point in time. And it is incredibly interesting as well, like how that came about. So I would encourage anybody if you want that literary masterpiece written in my voice, I'm happy to share that. Someone asked, what's the pricing model for our system? So the pricing model for our system is you have a software fee, and then you pay a per SDS fee for how many SDSs we are updating. So we'll call them active SDSs. So if we need to archive SDSs for you, that's a different beast, which is fine, but those are stagnant. Obviously, we're not going to continuously update those, so they don't require the human piece of it for us to go out, update, and put it into your system. So it's a software fee plus an SDS per SDS fee. So I know, and then it's unlimited users, which is another question I get asked a lot is there a user fee? And no, you can have as many users as you want and many logins as you want under that. I will say that also when we do that pricing structure, it includes your tier two reporting because our again on the flip side, some of the systems you look at, you're paying it's a lot of like add-on fees. So you pay for the tier two wizard in a lot of the systems. That is not how we operate. It's an all-in-one system. It makes no sense for clients and it makes no sense for us. So that when you buy the system, you get the SDS and you get the tier two reporting as well. So and what that looks like is we go in, and this is about the time of year where we're poking our client contacts and saying, okay, in your system you have X, Y, and Z that has the potential to hit the tier two reporting requirement, and we ask for max and average on hand towards the end of the calendar year so that we can meet that March 1st deadline. The other really cool thing about the SDS system is that that is all then housed there. So if you need to pull up from reporting year 22, 23, or whenever we filed for you, it's all right there in that system for you too.
Oh, that
So,
historical record, that can be so valuable as well. That's
and
wonderful.
one of the fun things too that since the merge, and I don't know, I didn't look to see how many kind of crossover clients that we have that also use have used the dashboard for GHG is that we're working to interface all of them so that
Yes.
if you're using the GHG module, if you're using the SDS module, it's all in that same login and you just pull up your menu. So just trying to make
Yes.
it a lot easier and user friendly.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Cassie. Yes, on the Foresight side, we were in a similar situation to Cornerstone where we had a software as a service effort around engaging and collecting utility data. So this would
Mm-hmm.
be energy, natural gas, propane, things like that. And we expanded that when greenhouse gases started coming into play. We realized that our system that was capturing all this data can be utilized to run these calculations. And so we call it foundation. I think it's Foundation EMS. And so that system is now part and combined with Foundation SDS. So it's just different modules that companies can pay for. So it's been a beautiful merger between the two companies to just be able to grow and expand these really unique systems that we've had and be able to adapt them and continue to find relevancy in the market in so many different ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is fun to get to learn stuff from each
Yes.
other. Like
Absolutely.
about Radium Girls, the shiny girls.
I love it. I love it. Well, tune in next month, as I mentioned, for that TCFD talk. And we really appreciate your time today. And thank you, everyone who was participating, and reach out if you have any questions. Take
Thanks,
care.
Cindy.
Yep. Thanks, Cassie. Bye bye.